Hello and welcome to Business Today Television. I'm Siddharth Zarabi and you're watching Modinomics 3.0. The economic survey that was tabled in Parliament earlier today has said the Indian economy is resilient and conservatively pegged to grow in real GDP terms at between 6.5 to 7% in the current financial year. There are many other highlights and points to note in the survey, and joining us now to speak about the key takeaways is former Chief Economic Advisor in the Ministry of Finance, Dr. Arvind Virmani, who is now a member of India's top planning body, NITI Aayog. Welcome to the show, Dr. Virmani. I want to begin by asking you to tell our viewers what is the single biggest point that you took away from this economic survey?
I think I'll make 2 points rather than one. The first, of course, was very noteworthy, was the somewhat conservative growth forecast. I think for the budget, it's a good thing. I have seen many discussions of budgets and plans, and I always used to argue that even if one thinks growth will be, we discussed at 1.8% and all, I used to say no, just stick to 7%. And in this case, given the international environment, etc., I think it's a safe forecast, and it's good it's done, but it was still a little bit of a surprise for me. The second point I would make is the key point. I think they put it very nicely. I put it in many different ways. We can take it up later. Is that I think they called it the gap between education and employment. This is a very, very important issue which I have been talking about, speaking about, writing about for the last 18 months or so. And the gap, that thing in the middle, is skills. So my analysis shows that people miss this thing. So I'm very happy that the economic survey has of course, the way they put it is in their own way, but the whole issue of skilling, which relates employment, education to employment, the link is the job skills. So in my view, those two are really the most noteworthy from my perspective, as somebody who's worked on and observed these things for decades.
Dr. Virmani, why do you think the survey is being conservative with regard to growth estimates? Is it on account of what seems to be happening globally? Is it on account of higher real interest rates in India? What do you think is the reason for this estimate?
So before I comment directly on it, my own forecast, growth forecasting, everybody has their own opinion. So you should not view my forecast as in conflict or in agreement with anybody. But my own forecast is 7% plus minus 0.5. Now, you could say that covers the same range. So it's just a way of looking at it. There's no conflict as such. They are saying 6.5, 7. I am saying most likely 7, but there'll be all kinds of shocks. So your question, the way I look at it, there will be shocks. We've had shocks, external, global, and they've been coming at a fast pace. There will be some positive, some negative. We know that will happen, but we don't know what those shocks will be. So that's the first point. So being the second point is, why is conservative good? Because it feeds into the budget. Again, I'm telling you from history, I don't know what is in the budget. I don't know what growth, because it's really the nominal forecast in the budget which matters. I don't know what is in that. But from history, I can tell you it is better to be conservative on the growth forecast and maybe a little under-optimistic on inflation, because then your budget can always be controlled if things go a little off. Right? So to be on track, I think conservative is good.
The survey, chapter 1, describing the state of the economy, uses the term steady as she goes. Dr. Virmani, if this is the growth forecast, a tad conservative, do you think that this also indicates that as far as the fiscal glide path is concerned, is this a hint towards a conservative projections as far as fiscal deficit is concerned in the previous year and the current year?
Siddharth, I'm very constrained from talking about the budget. I've had personal experiences of Parliament getting after people like me. So I really do not want to comment on what will be in the budget. But what I can say from observing from outside, I mean, I'm here now only for 12 to 18 months. From observing from outside for the previous 8 years, I think the government has generally had a very fiscally conservative stance, unless it was absolutely necessary to spend, which happened during the pandemic. So if I go on that, I would expect that stance would generally be maintained. That's
Okay.
all I can, I'm afraid, say. Yeah.
Fair point there. Fair point there. I'm going to now quote a paragraph from the survey highlights, and this is, it says, moving forward, healthier corporate and bank balance sheets will further strengthen private investment. The positive trends in residential real estate market indicate that the household sector capital formation is increasing significantly. Dr. Virmani, this survey also makes the point that gross fixed capital formation was up 9% in real terms in FY24. Does this augur well for the government's Capex driven growth strategy?
Yeah, so there are really 3 points there. Let me start with the real estate. Well before I joined the government 2 years ago, I forecast that real estate will lead the recovery of private investment, and that's exactly what's happened. The second point I made, I wrote a paper about 5 years ago, which nobody noticed, in which I analyzed the reasons for the decline in private investment. And I came to the conclusion that 90 to 95% of the decline was due to direct investment by household in real estate. So in the sense that is recovering, that will put the total investment also back into the initial trend. So that is on the real estate. That's 100%, I agree with that. What I have already said, that the decline was due to that. So real estate rising means GFCF is rising. Again, that is not a surprise. That is consistent with it. Because the decline in the ratio of private investment to GDP was due to household investment in real estate. A recovery of that means overall private rise, and therefore private GFC will recover. The part which is still we are all looking for signs, is that we expect an increase in manufacturing and manufacturing investment. That is really the part we are a little concerned about, and we have to watch for constantly, and I have personally also been watching that. So that is the part where there is slow recovery. I'll just mention one point why that is true, because I think you hinted at international. I think part of it is due to this uncertainty about what is going to happen from China. I mean, let's be very clear about it, because there is a suspicion that there are huge excess capacities in China, and there are suspicions that the Chinese, because of the way the communist system operates, they may dump goods into the world. I said this is a suspicion of many people. I am not saying whether they will or not, but that creates uncertainty for private investment, and I believe that is one of the important causes which is delaying, despite the rise in our UCAP, which is delaying some of the investment.
I have to ask you this because the economic survey also speaks at one place about China plus one. If there is fear of dumping, what does that mean for our tariff policy? What kind of tariff policy should we broadly then pursue?
Right. So I think it's very important for Indians to understand that even countries which talked about free markets, USA has imposed stiff tariffs on certain types of products where they fear dumping, basically in EVs and batteries. Europeans, who used to always talk about free markets, they've imposed up to 50 or higher percentage. Even Brazil has imposed 200% tariffs on EVs. So clearly, tariffs imposed on specifically on imports from certain countries or value added in certain countries is back on the agenda of the whole world. So certainly we would also have to keep that in mind when we work out. We'll have a more detailed discussion, I think, after the budget. Let's see what is there in the budget, because I think this issue perhaps directly or indirectly will be central in the next couple of years.
Dr. Virmani, I come back to the macro, and as far as the macro is concerned, the survey says that the focus on maintaining macroeconomic stability ensured that external challenges had a minimal impact on Indian economy. Do you sense that that will remain core to our broader policy agenda, not just the budget, for the forthcoming future? Because come November, we will see some changes in US trade policy with the change in government there. And we are seeing the change of governments in the rest of the developed world. So external challenges will be the key thing to watch out for all policymakers?
I think it's one of the things, as I mentioned, the context you've already seen. I think it remains one of the challenges, but the other side of it is also mentioned in the economic survey, which is what, again, interesting use of the word middle stand for MSMEs. In my view, we look at MSMEs too much as a revenue source in some way. And I think we've got to start looking at it as a job creator source. It's an attitudinal thing which I'm talking about. I'm not talking about specific policies, but the item is mentioned there. So I did want to bring it to the attention of your viewers. I think this attitudinal change, whether it's in MSMEs, whether it's the bureaucracy, whether it's taxation, I think we need to start looking at whether it's SMEs which have potential for job generation, not just as revenue sources, but as sources of growth and creation of jobs.
Chapter 3 in the survey speaks about inflation and prices, and it says the short-term outlook is positive, the long-term requires a clear vision. It makes a mention of, for example, interventions to manage seasonal price hikes in fruits and vegetables, which end up distorting the numbers to some extent. What would you want in that vision if it were to be announced?
Yeah, so again, let me clarify the way I think of it. I'm not sure whether it's in the budget or whatever, but if you look at the main source of fluctuation in the last 5 years, it is what we call top, right? Tomatoes, onions, and what was it? Potatoes.
Yes.
Right? So in all these cases, where is the long term? See, the long term, we already know internationally, the long term means processing these things, drying them, freezing them, and using them whenever there is a shortage, right? So that is a creation of a demand. I think it's difficult to change consumer habits, but we can change the habits of hotels, restaurants, etc. So because you have to create a market, the problem with agriculture is you've got to do demand and supply together.
Both.
So trade is very important. The intermediary is the trade. So if you create a demand and there's no supply, there is nothing happens. If you create a supply, there's no demand, nothing happens. So you have to create the demand and supply together. And in this case, it is the demand and supply of frozen tomatoes, processed tomatoes, potatoes, everything, which can then be used by the industry at least. And so that is what I think of in long terms, that the conventional solution of just getting, building buffer stocks is a short-term solution. I don't think that's a long-term solution. So you have certain short-term solution and certain medium. That's the overall context in my view.
Chapter 5, in terms of the growth outlook, also has an interesting mention, Dr. Virmani. Going forward, the government's focus must turn to bottom-up reform and strengthening the plumbing of governance so that structural reforms of the last decade yield strong, sustainable, balanced and inclusive growth. What is this referring to?
So this refers to, the word which I heard was state capacity and capability. But this cuts across everything. Whether you talk about taxation, you talk about controls and regulations, whether you talk about programs. So in some sense, state capacity and capability is whether you talk about states, whether you talk about panchayats, nagarpalikas. It's a huge topic, right? So the question is, where do we start? That's the difficult one. I hope, given the economic survey, we'll make a start in some of these places. Again, I have ideas. I don't want to keep giving my ideas. Let us see what the budget says, and then perhaps we can take the discussion forward.
In the context of a remark that you made in your first answer, which is employment scalability, Chapter 8 speaks about moving towards quality, and it then makes this data point that the unemployment rate has declined to 3.2% in FY23. It also says that net payroll additions, referring to EFO data, have more than doubled in the past 5 years, signaling healthy growth in formal employment. Do you think this is enough to quell the debate on employment numbers and the data debate that we also have off and on?
Yeah. So again, I'm sorry to keep saying my view, because I do not want to prejudge the budget, and you understand, right? I don't want to get anybody, including myself, into trouble. So the way I look at it is in terms of the employment population ratio. And I've looked at it very carefully. It's going to be in a paper, my forthcoming NITI paper. And there is no doubt in my mind that PLFS data shows a constant rise in the working population ratio, WPR, what we call. What does that mean? That means the number of jobs created is larger than the population. We may discuss endlessly and debate the numbers, but this graph is absolutely 100% clear. Okay? From 2017-18 to 22-23, the worker population ratio is rising. Number of jobs created is growing faster than the population. So if I look at it in a long-term thing, which is what my job is in a way, is that we've laid the base. Of course, we have to make sure this continues to happen. Now, as far as short-term is concerned, we know there was a pandemic. All kinds of things got disrupted. I mean, this debate, I think, cannot be solved. We can discuss, we can have another debate, but there's no end to it. Okay, so somebody will question, is it 8%, is it 3% for women, it's 5% for that? It's endless. Okay, but the long-term trend, in my view, is very clear. The female participation is going up, the worker population is going up, and the very recent data, for example, Professor Goldar has shown that manufacturing employment is beginning to go up. And that is the key to the future.
Dr. Virmani, does India need an employment-linked incentive scheme for the organized sector? We already have a rural employment scheme. There's always been talk of urban. But is there need for a ELI? We already have PLI.
Okay, so again, my analysis, which I spent a lot of time on skills, I think skills is the key. Why skills is the key? Because it determines the productivity, labor productivity. So whether you're already employed and you want higher real wages, or you want employment in a high productive job, there is no job without skills. And I think what we have neglected as a nation, again, I'm not talking about the government, what we have neglected as a nation is we keep talking about employment. We have to talk about skills. Every job has a skill. And it's like that paradox of agriculture, which I said, if you have a skill, but there's no job with that skill, it's a waste. It never matches. There is no job. And if you have a job where there are no skilled people, that job doesn't exist. So the key to rising wage rates of the lowest to the top people is we must upgrade our skills. So what is it? The government's role, in my view, is to facilitate this happening, to provide the information, to get the people who are involved in all this to talk with each other, to facilitate them. So, and this brings us back to this issue of state capacity and capability. That is what governments have to learn how to do, how to promote skills, how to promote that gap or reduce the gap between education and capability. And we are not very good at it traditionally.
So, on the point of a ELI in addition to a PLI, would you want to add?
So I think, sorry, I forgot in my, okay. So I think it's less important than to focus on skills. I'm not saying it's totally unimportant, but the problem with employment-linked incentive is we've had these cases many times before. It's very hard to make sure that is going in the right place. If one can do it, if one can invent something, I have nothing. I think it would be a positive thing. But the key is that if you don't achieve the results, because there's too much. I'll tell you why I'm scared, have a little bit of doubt. Is that whenever you account these schemes, there'll be tens of industries developing who say, we were zero, now we have 100 people, 1,000 people. How do you judge? Okay, that's my main problem. Otherwise, it's a very good thing. Theoretically, it's the ideal thing. But the problem has always been how to distinguish fake generation of employment from real.
Absolutely, and that's a issue that has been seen in the past. One final question, and this is referring to another chapter which says small and medium matters when it comes to industry. You've also seen this for decades now, and this sector, small and medium, could also be one of the largest contributors to formal employment. What do you think is perhaps needed in terms of industrial policy for this sector to both grow and deliver on the job creation front?
So, what my analysis suggests is two things. One, of course, is an old thing, not new. That one of the best things we can do for SMEs is reduce their regulatory burden. Okay, where does the regulatory burden come from? The most important part of it is the tax system, whether it's GST, whether it's direct taxes or exporters, import, export. If we can simplify the taxation to reduce that regulatory burden, that frees up the owner. You see, the difference between a corporation and an SME is that the owner does everything, okay, in SME. So he has limited time. So if you can free that owner from these sort of regulatory burden, then he has more time to think of the other critical thing, which is raising the skills and quality of his output. See, productivity is about quality. I think PM has made this point himself, that quality is one of the keys to whether it's export or domestic. So the quality aspect, there's a quality chain, okay? You cannot have, think of it as the weakest link in a chain. If you make a product from one end to the other, whether one person or 10%, if the quality in the middle or any part of it is linked, this is an old thing and it's very true of quality chain. That link is the weakest link in the chain, determines the overall quality. So you have to build the quality chain, which means skills, okay? Skills, quality, instruments. So if we can promote this, again, a difficult challenge, that's why it's not happened. You know, you may say, why haven't we done this? Because it's a very difficult challenge. So we've talked about apprenticeships, we talked about all kinds of things, getting large industries to train a lot of people, etc. The more skilled people you have for actual jobs existing in the economy, for example, in MSME, and more time the SMEs have to focus on quality issues, I think you will facilitate and improve that.
Dr. Virmani, the economic survey is a very detailed document that is of use both to analysts as well as the lay public. I thank you for taking out the time to help us understand some issues and questions that it raises, and hope to see you and talk to you after the budget. The first budget of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's third term is put out. As we've been calling it, it's Modinomics 3.0. Lots of good things for the Indian economy going into this budget, some concerns that need to be addressed, and hopefully we will see a good balanced exercise in hours from now. Dr. Virmani, thank you very much for your time. With that, it's a wrap on this show. We'll be back with more. Until then, goodbye.